The millionaire's daughter wouldn't eat, until the poor nanny looked inside the cabinet and uncovered everything. Among jars and unlabeled bottles, she understood why the girl kept getting worse. Someone was manipulating everything and profiting from it. From that moment on, she knew either she stayed silent or faced a system built to silence. Megan held the eviction notice with trembling hands, sitting on the edge of the narrow bed in the small apartment she shared with her son. The words danced in front of her, but their meaning was too clear to ignore. 15 days. She had just 15 days to come up with 3 months of back rent, or she and Leo, her 5-year-old boy, sleeping peacefully in the next room, oblivious to the storm brewing in his mother's life, would be out on the street. Megan reread the document for the 3rd time, as if the words could magically change their meaning. But they didn't. There it was, the deadline, the amount due, the landlord's signature. It was real. It was final. The last 8 months had been a painful downward spiral. First came the layoff from the cosmetics factory where she'd worked for 6 years. The company cited cost-cutting, but Megan knew it was because she had missed too many days to care for Leo when he got sick. Then, her savings melted away, consumed by bills, food, and medicine. Megan had knocked on every possible door, sent out resumes for dozens of jobs, and endured humiliating interviews. With every no, she felt smaller, more invisible. The nights were the worst. She would wake up at 3 in the morning, her chest tight, her breath short, wondering how she would feed Leo the next day, how she would pay the overdue electric bill. The thought of losing custody of her son, of someone deciding she wasn't fit to care for her own child, terrified her more than anything else. That Tuesday morning, when her cell phone rang with an unknown number, Megan almost didn't answer. She had learned that strange calls usually brought collection agencies or false promises, but something made her accept the call. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was intuition. On the other end, a formal, distant female voice asked if she was still looking for a job. The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Peterson, the head housekeeper of a residence in a wealthy suburb north of the city, and explained that they urgently needed someone for general housekeeping and cleaning. The salary was $2,500 a month. There would also be meals during her shift and a monthly transit pass. Megan accepted on the spot without a second thought. 2 days later, wearing the best clothes she owned, a pair of black slacks she had ironed 3 times and a white blouse, Megan got Leo ready and left him with Mrs. Gable. Her neighbor, a woman in her late 60s who lived alone in the apartment next door, had offered to watch the boy. Megan was too grateful to refuse, even knowing she was accumulating a debt of kindness she might never be able to repay. She took 2 crowded city buses, standing the whole way, pushed and shoved by hurried passengers, and then the subway to the end of the line. When she emerged onto the street, she immediately felt the difference. The air seemed cleaner, the streets wider, the pace calmer. There were no street vendors on the sidewalks or trash piled up on the corners. This was another world, separated by only a few miles but light years away from the reality she knew. The streets were lined with oak and maple trees, with high walls hiding mansions. Luxury cars drove by slowly, and well-dressed women walked with designer shopping bags. Megan looked down at her own clothes, suddenly aware of how worn they seemed. She walked 5 blocks until she found the address scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper in her purse. The gate was imposing, wrought iron with gold accents flanked by cameras on each corner. Megan pressed the buzzer and waited, wiping her sweaty palms on her pants. A metallic voice came through the intercom. She announced she had an interview. Seconds later, the gate swung open with a heavy groan, and she walked in, crossing an impeccable garden with a perfectly manicured lawn and a stone fountain in the center. The house was enormous, 3 stories of modern architecture, all in shades of white and grey with mirrored windows that reflected the sky. Megan climbed the marble steps to the front door, feeling smaller and smaller in the face of such opulence. Mrs. Peterson received her in the foyer. She was a woman in her 60s, thin, with grey hair pulled into a tight bun, light eyes and a severe expression. She wore a simple, elegant black dress and flat leather shoes. She didn't smile. She greeted Megan with a nod of her head and led her inside, ignoring her outstretched hand. The mansion was cold, despite the 100-degree heat outside. The air conditioning maintained an artificial and uncomfortable temperature. The floors were light marble that reflected the recessed lights in the ceiling. The walls were covered in discreet wallpaper in shades of beige and grey. There were no photographs on the walls, no colourful paintings, no personal objects in sight. Everything was organised, clean, but devoid of life. It looked more like a showroom from an interior design magazine than a home where people actually lived. Megan felt a shiver run down her spine as she followed Mrs. Peterson through the silent hallways. Her footsteps echoed on the marble, and she tried to tread more lightly to avoid making so much noise. In the large modern kitchen, with its white cabinets, dark granite countertops, and state-of-the-art appliances, the housekeeper finally stopped. She explained the working conditions in a firm, measured voice, as if reading from a manual. Megan would work from 7 in the morning to 5 in the evening, Monday through Saturday. She would have a 1-hour lunch break, which she was to take in the kitchen, and 2 short breaks. Her duties included general cleaning of the house, washing and ironing clothes, organizing the rooms, and assisting in the kitchen. Mrs. Peterson then moved closer, lowering her voice as they're sharing a secret. She said there were very important rules to be followed. All the previous employees who had failed to respect them had been dismissed quickly. The first rule was silence. The house was to remain quiet at all times, with no unnecessary chatter, no radio, no music. The second was absolute discretion. Megan was not to ask questions about the family, the household routine, or anything not strictly related to her work. The third, and most important, was that she was never to go up to the second floor without express permission. There was a child in the house, a little girl, Mrs. Peterson explained with an expression Megan couldn't decipher. The child was under special care due to a delicate health condition. She could not be disturbed, her routine could not be altered, and she could not have contact with strangers. It was for the child's own good, the housekeeper emphasized, that these rules existed. Megan agreed to everything without question. She needed this job too badly. Mrs. Peterson then gave her a quick tour of the rest of the house, always avoiding the dark wooden staircase that led to the upper floor. Megan noticed that the housekeeper would occasionally lock her gaze in that direction, as if checking to see if someone was watching from above. The next day, Megan started work. She woke up at 5 in the morning, while it was still dark, made breakfast for Leo, left the boy sleeping under Mrs. Gable's care, and rushed out to catch the first bus. She arrived at the mansion punctually at 7 o'clock. The routine was exhausting, but Megan didn't complain. She cleaned each room with meticulous care, dusted the furniture, vacuumed the Persian rugs, and wiped the windows until not a single streak remained. Mrs. Peterson supervised her every move, appearing silently behind her, correcting minor details, pointing out invisible imperfections. Megan accepted it all in silence, focused on doing her job well. During the first few days, she saw no one but the housekeeper. The house seemed deserted. Sometimes she would hear distant footsteps or the sound of a door closing on the floor above, but nothing more. Megan began to wonder who actually lived there. Mrs. Peterson had mentioned a child, but there was no sign of a child's life in that place. There were no toys scattered about, no drawings. On the walls, no small shoes by the entrance, no backpacks, nothing to indicate a child lived there. In the second week, while cleaning the living room, Megan found a framed photograph hidden behind a tall ceramic vase. It was a picture of a serious, middle-aged man in a dark suit, next to a beautiful young blonde woman in a light-colored dress. The woman was holding a baby wrapped in a pink blanket. She was smiling for the camera, but her eyes seemed distant, almost sad, as if she were looking at something far beyond the lens. The man was not smiling. Megan studied the photo for a few seconds, trying to find any trace of warmth or affection in the family scene. She found none. She carefully put the photograph back in its place, feeling as if she had intruded on something very private. It was in the third week that Megan heard it for the first time. It was late afternoon, around 4:30. She was finishing up the ironing when a soft sound reached her. It sounded like a muffled cry coming from somewhere distant, as if someone were crying with their mouth covered. Megan stopped what she was doing turned off the iron and listened intently. The sound continued for a few seconds, interspersed with stifled sobs, and then it stopped. She looked around. Mrs. Peterson had gone out to run errands. Megan felt her heart ache. She knew that sound. It was the cry of a child trying not to be heard, trying not to be a bother. It was the kind of cry that came from someone who had already learned that no one would come to comfort them. She went up a few steps of the staircase, trying to better pinpoint where it was coming from. The second-floor hallway was dark even during the day, with only a small window at the end letting in a faint beam of light. She stood there on the middle of the stairs, torn between the maternal curiosity compelling her to check and the paralyzing fear of disobeying and losing her job. After a few minutes, she went back down and returned to her work, but the sound echoed in her mind. That night, Megan hugged Leo tighter than usual, inhaling the scent of baby shampoo in his hair. The boy, excited, told her all about his day playing with Mrs. Gable. Megan listened attentively, but her mind kept returning to that muffled cry, to that house empty of affection, to that invisible child no one seemed to see. In the following days, Megan started paying closer attention to everything. She began to observe the patterns, the routines. She noticed that Mrs. Peterson went up to the second floor exactly 3 times a day, always at the same times, at 8 in the morning, right after Megan arrived, at 12:30 during lunch, and at 6 in the evening. The housekeeper always carried a tray of food on her way up, and came down with the tray still full or nearly full. The food came back untouched most of the time. Megan also noticed that Mrs. Peterson locked the kitchen door when she prepared the meals to be taken upstairs, as if she didn't want anyone to see what she was doing. One afternoon, Mrs. Peterson received an emergency call from a relative who lived out of state. She had to leave in a hurry and would be gone for the rest of the day. Before leaving, she turned to Megan with a stern expression and repeated the rules. "You are in charge of the house. Continue your normal routine. Do not go up to the second floor. Do not go near the girls' room. Is that clear?" Megan agreed. As soon as she heard the gate close and the car drive away, Megan stood still in the kitchen, knowing that above her was a child, alone, possibly hungry, possibly scared. She tried to continue cleaning, but she couldn't concentrate. Her hands were shaking. After 30 minutes of internal struggle, Megan made a decision. She took a deep breath and slowly, quietly climbed the stairs. The hallway was even more oppressive up close, almost claustrophobic. There were 5 doors, all closed. Megan stopped in front of each one, pressing her ear against the wood. Nothing at the first, nothing at the second. At the 3rd door, she heard soft breathing. Megan grasped the doorknob, feeling the cold metal. She turned it carefully. The door was locked. She was about to go back down when she heard a faint voice from the other side. Megan pressed her forehead against the wood. "I'm Megan," she said softly. "I work here in the house. Are you okay?" Silence. Megan waited, her heart pounding. Then the voice returned, laced with surprise and fear. "Who are you? Why are you talking to me?" "I work here. What's your name?" The name came out so quietly that Megan almost didn't hear it. "Sophie." It was as if the entire world stood still. Sophie. The child had a name. She had a voice. She was real. Megan swallowed hard. "Sophie, how old are you?" 7. There was a pause. "But I'm not allowed to talk to anyone. Mrs. Peterson said it's dangerous. She said I have to be quiet or I'll get worse." "Why is it dangerous?" "Sophie, why do you have to stay in there?" The answer came laden with a sadness that broke Megan's heart. "Because I'm different, because I'm sick, because otherwise I'll make everyone else sick too. Mrs. Peterson said it's better this way, that my father sent me to stay here, that he doesn't want to see me because I remind him of bad things." Megan felt tears burn her eyes, streaming hot down her cheeks. That small, frightened voice, carrying the weight of guilt that wasn't hers, believing in cruel lies, shattered her heart into pieces. She thought of Leo, free, running through their apartment, laughing, playing, living his childhood to the fullest. And here was Sophie, locked in a room, believing she deserved this, that she was a burden, that no one wanted her. "You're not different, Sophie," Megan said. her voice firm but gentle. "And you're not sick, and you don't have to stay in there. I'm going to help you. I promise I'll find a way to help you." "You can't. Mrs. Peterson will be very angry. She always is when someone tries to talk to me. The other ladies who worked here tried, and they left, and my father doesn't come here. He's always away. He doesn't like me." Megan heard the distant sound of the gate opening. Mrs. Peterson was back. Panic seized her immediately. She hurried down the stairs and back to the library, grabbing a duster with trembling hands, just as the housekeeper entered a few minutes later. Mrs. Peterson watched Megan with a piercing gaze. She asked if everything was all right. Megan denied that anything had happened. The housekeeper nodded and left, saying in a threatening tone that she hoped Megan had understood the rules perfectly. When Megan left the mansion, her legs felt like jelly. The journey home was a blur. Her mind was consumed with Sophie. When she got to her apartment, Leo ran to hug her. "Mummy, you took so long!" Megan scooped him up and held him tight. Leo laughed. "Mummy, you're squeezing me!" Megan didn't let go, breathing in deeply. That night, after giving Leo a bath, preparing dinner with the few ingredients she had, reading him a bedtime story, and tucking him in with a kiss on the forehead, Megan sat on the old living room couch and finally allowed the tears to fall freely. She cried in silence, so as not to wake her son, her hands covering her face. She couldn't stop thinking about Sophie, a 7-year-old girl locked in a room, no toys, no friends, no school, no life, believing she was sick, that she was different, that no one wanted her. Megan knew pain. She knew desperation. But never, not even in her darkest moments, had she felt rejected the way Sophie clearly did. At least Megan had Leo. She had a purpose. What did Sophie have? Empty walls and a locked door. Megan thought about quitting the job, about simply not going back, about walking away before she got too involved, before she risked the precarious stability she had managed to find. But every time she convinced herself that this was the right decision, Sophie's voice would return to her mind. That voice asking for help without having the courage to ask. That voice accepting a prison she didn't deserve. And Megan knew she couldn't do it. She couldn't turn her back. Something inside her, the same instinct that made her protect Leo, wouldn't let her abandon Sophie. But how could she help? She had no proof. She had no access to the room. What if she was wrong? Megan couldn't make accusations without being sure, but deep down, Megan knew the truth. She recognized neglect when she saw it. Sophie was being kept in that situation, not for medical necessity, but for darker reasons. As she stared at the stained ceiling of her small apartment, listening to the city noises outside, the distant sirens, the passing cars, Megan made a decision. She would keep working at the mansion. She would be patient. She would watch everything carefully. She would gather information. And when she was sure of what was happening, when she knew exactly what she was up against, then she would act. She didn't know how yet. She didn't have a plan. But she knew she couldn't leave Sophie in that situation. She couldn't let another day go by without doing something, however small, to change that reality. Megan dried her tears, took a deep breath, and went to her room. She lay down next to Leo, who was sleeping soundly, clutching his teddy bear. She watched her son's peaceful face, his cheeks still chubby from childhood, his long eyelashes, and she thought of Sophie alone in that dark room, with no one to hug, no one to tell her everything would be okay. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow she would start looking for answers. Tomorrow she would take the first real step to save Sophie. She didn't know how yet, but she would find a way. She had to. When the alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning, Megan was already awake, staring at the ceiling with wide-open eyes, determination growing inside her chest like a flame no one could extinguish. Megan returned to the mansion the next day with a renewed purpose. Every step she took through, the silent hallways now had a different meaning. She wasn't just an employee doing her chores, she was someone with a mission. As she cleaned, dusted the furniture, and organized the rooms, her mind was working in overdrive, planning, observing, looking for opportunities. Mrs. Peterson seemed more vigilant than ever. Her light eyes followed Megan's every move with a disturbing intensity. The housekeeper would appear silently behind her at unexpected moments, as if trying to catch her doing something wrong. Megan maintained a neutral expression, a professional posture, but inside, her heart raced every time the woman suddenly appeared. Megan began a routine of meticulous observation. She mentally noted the times Mrs. Peterson left, how long she was gone, and what her patterns were. She discovered that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the housekeeper went to the grocery store and was gone for at least 40 minutes. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays she had shorter errands, but was still out for 15 to 20 minutes. Saturday was the trickiest day, as Mrs. Peterson rarely left the house. On the third day after her first contact with Sophie, Megan had an idea. During her lunch break, when Mrs. Peterson went upstairs with the tray, Megan discreetly watched from the kitchen window. She saw the housekeeper leave the house 5 minutes later, get in her car, and drive off. It was Thursday, and Megan remembered that the woman always left at this time to go to the market. She would have at least 40 minutes. Megan's heart pounded as she climbed the stairs. This time she brought a piece of paper and a pen she had taken from the library. She stopped in front of Sophie's locked door and knocked lightly. "Sophie? It's me, Megan. Are you there?" The reply came almost immediately, as if the girl had been waiting. "Megan, you came back." "I came back, and I'll come back whenever I can. Sophie, I need to understand what's happening better. Can you tell me?" There was a long pause. Megan waited, leaning against the door, listening to the soft breathing on the other side. Finally, Sophie began to speak. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as if she were afraid the very walls could hear her. "I've lived here since I was born, but I don't remember leaving this room in a very long time. Mrs. Peterson says it's because I'm weak, that I have a sickness that no one can catch. She brings food, but I can't eat almost anything. Everything makes me sick. She says it's because of the sickness that I have to take the medicine she brings." "What kind of medicine, Sophie?" "Some white liquids that taste bad. They make my stomach hurt. I throw up afterwards. Mrs. Peterson says it's normal, that it's part of the treatment, that if I don't take it, I'll get much worse and I'll have to go away forever." Megan felt anger rise in her chest. The girl was being manipulated, controlled through fear. "And are you in pain? Do you feel sick?" "Always. I'm always tired. I have no strength. Sometimes my head hurts so much I can't even open my eyes. Mrs. Peterson says it's the sickness getting worse." "Sophie, do you go to school? Do you have friends?" The laugh that came from the girl was so sad it broke Megan's heart. "School? No. Mrs. Peterson says I can't go out, that the other kids will get sick because of me. She teaches me to read and write in here sometimes when she has time. And your father, do you see him?" Another long silence. When Sophie spoke again, her voice was filled with a pain too deep for a 7-year-old. "My father comes here sometimes, but he never comes up to see me. I hear his voice downstairs. Mrs. Peterson says he can't see me because it makes him too sad, that he lost my mother and that I remind him of her and it hurts too much. She says it's better this way, that one day when I'm better, he'll want to see me again." "And your mother, what happened to her?" Sophie hesitated. "Mrs. Peterson says she left right after I was born, that she couldn't stand to be here, that she was weak and sick like me. That's why I'm like this too." Megan wiped away the tears streaming down her face. The cruelty embedded in those lies was devastating. "Sophie, listen to what I'm about to tell you. You are not sick. You are not to blame for anything. And your mother didn't abandon you because you were weak. None of that is true." "How do you know?" Sophie's voice was a mix of hope and despair. "Because I'm a mother. And I know that no real mother would abandon her child by choice. Something happened to her, but it wasn't your fault. And you are not sick, Sophie. What they are doing to you is wrong, very wrong." Megan heard a muffled sob from the other side of the door. "Please don't leave me here, please. I promise I'll be good. I promise I won't be any trouble. Just get me out of here." Sophie's cry was desperate, years of loneliness and pain condensed into those sobs. Megan pressed her forehead against the door, her own tears falling uncontrollably. "I will get you out of here, Sophie, I promise. But I have to do it the right way, or they'll stop me and you'll be even more alone. Do you trust me? I trust you. Then you need to be strong for a little while longer. Keep doing everything Mrs. Peterson tells you. Don't let her suspect we're talking. And I will find a way to help you, I promise. Megan heard the sound of the gate opening downstairs. Panic. She ran down the stairs, back to the kitchen, and pretended to be washing dishes when Mrs. Peterson walked in, carrying grocery bags. In the following days, Megan began to act more strategically. When Mrs. Peterson left for her daily errands, Megan would quickly go upstairs and talk to Sophie through the door. Little by little, she pieced together a disturbing puzzle. Sophie hadn't seen sunlight in months. She had no toys, only a few old books. Her only clothing was a white nightgown that was never changed. The girl hadn't had a bath in weeks. Megan also started paying more attention to when Mrs. Peterson prepared Sophie's food. She observed that the housekeeper used normal ingredients for the household meals, but when she prepared something for the girl, she added substances from vials she kept locked in a specific cabinet. Once, when the housekeeper went to answer the phone, Megan managed to photograph the labels of the vials with her cell phone. That night, after putting Leo to bed, Megan searched the internet for the names she had photographed. What she found left her shocked and furious. They were dietary supplements, vitamins and minerals that were beneficial in proper doses, but when used in completely inappropriate doses and combined incorrectly, especially in a malnourished child, they could cause severe nausea, constant vomiting, total loss of appetite, intense abdominal pain, extreme weakness, dizziness, and mental confusion. They weren't illegal substances, not poisons in the traditional sense, but their deliberately incorrect use, day after day, month after month, was slowly destroying Sophie's health in a way that could seem natural to anyone who didn't investigate deeply. Megan also discovered something more disturbing. Researching the Miller family, she found an old newspaper article in the digital archive of a major New York publication. 8 years ago, the wife of a businessman named Edward Miller had passed away under not entirely clear circumstances, shortly after giving birth to their only daughter. The article was deliberately vague, respectful, as stories about wealthy and influential families often are. It only mentioned that the young woman, who was just 22 at the time, had faced complications during childbirth and had not survived. The family had withdrawn from public life after the tragedy, refusing interviews and social appearances. What caught Megan's attention was a sentence at the end of the article. It mentioned that the deceased, named Isabel, had been the heiress to a considerable fortune from her own family, and that she had left a will, specifying that her assets would go to her newborn daughter. Edward Miller, a widower devastated by his loss, had stepped away from his business for months, leaving the management of the house and the care of the baby in the hands of the family's trusted housekeeper, Alberta Peterson. Megan connected the dots with frightening clarity. Sophie was the daughter. Edward was the absent father, drowning in his own grief and guilt. And Mrs. Peterson was the housekeeper who had taken complete control of the house and the child after the mother's death. But why? What was the real reason for keeping Sophie in such an inhuman situation? Continuing her discreet investigation, Megan discovered something crucial. Rummaging through documents she found in a file cabinet in the library one day, when Mrs. Peterson was out handling bank matters, she discovered that Sophie's mother had left a substantial inheritance to her daughter. The amount was in the millions of dollars, including properties, stocks, and other financial investments. But the will was clear. The money could only be fully accessed when Sophie turned 18 and took direct control of her assets. Until then, legal guardianship of the child and administrative control of the inheritance, including income and investment decisions, were in the hands of a legally appointed administrator. And that administrator, with broad powers documented and notarized, was Alberta Peterson. The revelation was like a punch to the gut. It all made sense now. If Sophie remained sick, fragile, and dependent, Mrs. Peterson would maintain control indefinitely. And if something happened to Sophie before she came of age, the inheritance would revert to the legal guardian. The housekeeper was literally destroying the girl's health for money. Megan knew she needed more concrete proof. She began to discreetly record conversations on her phone. She filmed Mrs. Peterson preparing Sophie's food with the inappropriate supplements. She photographed the inheritance documents, but she knew it still wasn't enough. She needed something more definitive. The opportunity came on a Tuesday. Mrs. Peterson received a call informing her that her lawyer wanted an urgent meeting. The housekeeper became visibly nervous, but agreed to go. Before leaving, she locked Sophie in her room as always and gave Megan her usual instructions. Megan watched from the window as the car drove away, mentally counting the minutes she would have. As soon as the gate closed, Megan ran upstairs. This time, she had brought tools. A bobby pin she had bent into a specific shape, a thin screwdriver she had borrowed from Mrs. Gable. She tried to pick the lock, her hands sweating, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would jump out of her chest. The first few minutes were frustrating. The lock wouldn't give. Megan took a deep breath, remembered the videos she had watched, and tried again more calmly. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 agonizing minutes, and finally she heard a click. The lock gave way. The door opened slowly, creaking slightly on its rusty hinges. The room was even worse than Megan had imagined. Small, dark, with only a tiny window covered by a heavy curtain that blocked almost all light. There was a single bed with grey, dirty sheets, a nightstand with a half-empty glass of water, and nothing else. No toys, no pictures, no colour. It was a cell, not a child's room. Sophie was sitting on the floor in the farthest corner of the room, leaning against the wall, hugging her knees. She was so small, so fragile. She looked like she was 5, not 7. Her blonde hair was tangled and dirty, falling over her thin shoulders. Her large blue eyes widened when she saw Megan. Her first reaction was fear. She shrank back even further like a cornered animal. "Sophie, it's okay. It's me, Megan. I'm not going to hurt you," Megan said in the softest voice she could manage, even as emotion threatened to break her words. The girl watched Megan for long seconds, as if trying to decide if she could trust this reality. Her eyes scanned Megan's face, searching for signs of lies or danger. Then slowly her eyes filled with tears that began to fall silently, down her pale, thin cheeks. "Are you real? Do you really exist? Or are you just another dream?" Megan knelt on the floor and opened her arms. Sophie hesitated for only a second before running to her. The hug was desperate, urgent, as if Sophie were clinging to the last piece of driftwood in the middle of a stormy ocean. Megan held her tight, feeling the girl's sharp bones through the thin nightgown. "I'm here, Sophie. I'm here, and I'm going to protect you." Sophie cried softly, sobbing into Megan's shoulder. "I thought no one would ever hear me. I thought I was going to be here forever. You're not. I promise you're not." Megan picked Sophie up. The girl weighed frighteningly little. She carried her carefully down the stairs and into the kitchen. There she prepared something light, just a thin soup and a piece of bread. Sophie ate slowly with difficulty, but she managed to keep the food down. While Sophie ate, Megan took pictures. Pictures of the empty, dirty, poorly ventilated room. Pictures of the malnourished girl. Pictures of the supplement vials. She saved everything on her phone and immediately backed it up to the cloud. But she knew time was running out. Mrs. Peterson would be back soon. She had to take Sophie back to the room. The girl clung to her, begging not to go back. Megan promised it would only be for a little while longer, just until she could get real help. When Mrs. Peterson returned, she found Megan cleaning the dining room. The housekeeper looked around suspiciously, as if she could sense that something had changed. Megan kept her expression serene, but inside her heart was racing. That night, Megan didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, phone in hand, looking at the photos and videos she had collected. She knew she had to act quickly. But how? If she went to the authorities alone, without Sophie's father knowing, they might question her. And if Mrs. Peterson found out first, she could do something terrible. Megan needed an ally, and there was only one person who technically had authority over the situation: Edward Miller, Sophie's father. A man who for years had been absent, who had allowed this to happen under his own roof. But maybe, just maybe, if he saw the proof, if he understood what was really happening to his daughter, maybe he would finally act. The problem was how to reach him. Mrs. Peterson controlled all communication with the outside world. Edward was traveling according to the housekeeper, but Megan had a plan, a risky plan, but it was her only chance. The next day, Megan arrived at the mansion with renewed determination. She had spent the night writing a detailed letter, explaining everything, attaching printouts of the photos and videos. She put it all in a sealed envelope. Now she just needed to find a way to get it into Edward Miller's hands. The opportunity arose when Mrs. Peterson casually mentioned that Edward would be back from his trip at the end of the week and would be coming to the house to sign some important documents. Megan felt a mix of hope and dread. This was her chance. But she had to be extremely careful. That afternoon, while cleaning the office, Megan hid the envelope inside a folder of documents she knew Edward would need to review. She placed it where he would certainly see it, but where Mrs. Peterson wouldn't think to check. With that done, all that was left was to wait, and to pray that Edward was the kind of man who would do the right thing when confronted with the truth. Because if he wasn't, Megan would have put Sophie in even more danger, and herself as well. The next few days were torture. Megan continued to work as usual, talking to Sophie through the door whenever possible, reassuring the girl that soon, very soon, everything would change. Sophie clung to every word, to the hope that Megan brought. On Thursday evening, as Megan was finishing her tasks, she heard the sound of a car arriving. She looked out the window and saw a tall middle-aged man in a dark suit get out of a black car. Edward Miller had arrived. Megan's heart pounded. This was it. Everything she had done, all the risks she had taken, it all depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Mrs. Peterson hurried down to greet Edward. Megan pretended to be busy in the kitchen, but every fiber of her being was focused on what was happening. She heard voices in the living room, Mrs. Peterson speaking in a formal, respectful tone, Edward responding in a tired, distant voice. Megan prayed silently for him to go to the office, to open the folder, to read the letter. Her life and Sophie's depended on it. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Megan heard footsteps heading toward the office. The door closed. Silence. Megan could barely breathe. She kept pretending to wash dishes, her hands shaking so much she almost dropped a plate. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15. And then Megan heard it. It wasn't a scream, but something worse. It was the sound of something heavy falling to the floor. Then Edward's voice altered, almost unrecognizable, shouting Mrs. Peterson's name. It had begun. Megan woke up at 3 in the morning with her heart pounding. The nightmare had been so real, so vivid, that she could still feel the desperation coursing through her veins even after opening her eyes. Sophie, alone in that dark, cold room, screaming for help while Megan tried to reach her, but the door kept moving farther away, as if the entire house were conspiring against her. The walls stretched, the hallway extended infinitely, and Sophie's screams echoed, growing fainter and fainter until they disappeared completely. Megan got out of bed, her legs still trembling, and went to Leo's room. She stood there in the doorway, watching her son sleep peacefully, clutching his teddy bear, his breathing soft and regular. The difference between the two children was stark and unbearable. Leo had freedom, love, security. He could run, play, laugh, live. Sophie had only loneliness, fear, and pain. And that difference, that absurd injustice, was eating Megan up inside. She went back to the living room, knowing she wouldn't be able to sleep anymore. She sat on the old couch and stayed there in the darkness, thinking of all the ways this could go wrong. What if Edward didn't read the letter? What if he read it but didn't believe her? What if Mrs. Peterson found the envelope first? What if Megan had put Sophie in even greater danger by acting? The questions multiplied, each one more terrifying than the last. The days following her decision to place the letter in the office were the most agonizing of Megan's life. Edward still hadn't returned from his trip. The envelope was still there, hidden among the documents, waiting to be discovered. And with each passing day, Megan felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. What if he didn't read it? What if Mrs. Peterson found it first? What if Megan had put Sophie in even greater danger? On Wednesday morning, a week after hiding the letter, something changed. Megan arrived at the mansion to find Mrs. Peterson especially tense. The housekeeper was on the phone, speaking in a low but agitated voice. Megan pretended to be busy in the kitchen, but managed to catch fragments of the conversation. "Yes, I understand. No, there haven't been any problems. The girl is stable. Yes, the procedures are continuing as normal. There's no reason for concern." Mrs. Peterson's voice was defensive, almost desperate. When the housekeeper hung up, she turned and found Megan standing there. Her eyes narrowed. "Did you hear something?" "No, ma'am. I was just making coffee," Megan lied, keeping her voice steady. Mrs. Peterson watched her for a long moment. Then, abruptly, she completely changed the day's routine. She said she had to leave to handle urgent matters and that Megan should only clean the ground floor. Under no circumstances was she to go up to the second floor. The emphasis was clear, almost threatening. After Mrs. Peterson left, Megan felt uneasy. Something was wrong. The housekeeper was nervous, acting even more controlling than usual. Megan quickly went up to the second floor, ignoring the orders. She needed to talk to Sophie to know if she was okay. She reached the bedroom door and knocked softly. "Sophie, it's me." Silence. Megan knocked again, louder this time. "Sophie, please answer me." Nothing. Panic began to take hold of Megan, rising in her throat like a suffocating wave. What if something had happened? What if Mrs. Peterson had done something to Sophie? What if the girl was unconscious or worse? Megan tried the doorknob forcefully as if she could will it open. It was locked, as always. Her hands were shaking so much she had to take several deep breaths before she could get the bobby pin she kept in her pocket. She tried to pick the lock, but her fingers were clumsy with fear. The pin slipped, went in wrong, got stuck. Megan could feel cold sweat trickling down her back, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. "Come on, come on, come on," she repeated mentally, like a desperate prayer. Finally, after several minutes that felt like hours, she heard a click. The lock gave way. The room was darker than usual, oppressive. The curtains were completely drawn, not allowing even a sliver of light to enter. The air was heavy, stuffy, with a cloying, sweet smell of medicine and sickness. Megan entered slowly, her eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Her heart was still racing, her breathing ragged. "Sophie," she called softly, her voice betraying the panic she felt. A low, almost inaudible moan came from the darkest corner of the room. Megan ran over, tripping on a pile of blankets on the way, and found Sophie huddled on the floor between the wall and the bed, clutching her stomach. The girl was as pale as paper, her lips almost colorless, sweating profusely despite the cold in the room. Her blonde hair was stuck to her forehead with sweat, and she was trembling uncontrollably. "Sophie, my God, what happened?" "Mrs. Peterson, she got mad. She said I was getting too much better, that I was getting too strong. She gave me different medicine yesterday. My stomach hurt so much." Sophie's voice was weak, broken by sobs of pain. Megan felt rage explode in her chest. Mrs. Peterson had escalated what she was doing, probably because she sensed she was losing control. Megan carefully picked Sophie up. The girl was hot, feverish. She needed real medical help, and she needed it fast. But Megan was at an impossible crossroads. If she took Sophie to the hospital now, without Edward's permission, without concrete proof of what was happening, the authorities might not believe her. Worse, they could return Sophie to Mrs. Peterson, and Megan would lose any chance to help. But if she waited, if she did nothing, Sophie could get even worse. Megan carried Sophie downstairs to the kitchen. She gave her water to drink, made chamomile tea to soothe her stomach. Sophie managed a few sips before throwing it all up. The girl cried softly, apologizing for making a mess. "You don't have to apologize for anything, Sophie. None of this is your fault," Megan whispered, wiping the girl's face with a damp cloth. It was at that moment, as she was cleaning Sophie's mouth for the third time, that Megan's phone rang. The shrill sound in the quiet kitchen made her jump. She looked at the screen. It was Mrs. Gable. Megan answered with a sense of foreboding already settling in her stomach. "Megan, I need to talk to you. It's about Leo." Her neighbor's voice was tense, worried, in a tone Megan had never heard before. Megan's heart froze instantly, the blood seeming to turn to ice in her veins. What happened? Is he okay? Did he get hurt? The questions came out in a desperate torrent, her voice rising. He's fine. Don't worry about that. Physically, he's great, playing in the living room right now. But Megan, a social worker, was here today. She showed up this morning unannounced. She asked questions about you, about how much time you spend away every day, about who takes care of him, about the conditions of your home, about whether you have problems with alcohol or other substances, about your financial history. Mrs. Gable paused, as if weighing her words. Megan, I think someone reported you. Someone who wants to hurt you. Megan felt the floor drop out from under her. Who? Why? I don't know, but the woman said they're going to make a formal visit next week. They're going to evaluate the conditions, the situation. Megan, you need to be prepared. After she hung up, Megan stood there, holding Sophie, her world crumbling around her. She understood immediately what had happened. Mrs. Peterson had found out that Megan was investigating, had discovered she was getting too close to Sophie, and she had attacked Megan at her most vulnerable point, her son, her family, her reason for living. If Megan lost custody of Leo, she would lose everything, but if she abandoned Sophie now, the girl would have no one left. It was an impossible choice. How do you choose between saving one child and protecting another? How do you decide which life is worth more? Sophie, still in Megan's arms, whispered, "Are you going to leave too? Everyone leaves, no one stays." The words broke Megan's heart. "No, I'm not leaving, I promise." But how was she going to keep that promise? How was she going to protect both children at the same time? Megan took Sophie back to her room, locked the door as it was before, and spent the rest of the day in a state of functional shock. She cleaned mechanically, her mind racing in circles, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. When she got home that night, she hugged Leo with desperation. The boy, sensing something was wrong, asked, "Mummy, why are you crying?" "I'm okay, sweetie, I'm just really tired." That night, after putting Leo to bed, Megan sat at the kitchen table and finally allowed the tears to fall uncontrollably. She had tried to do the right thing, but she was being punished for it. She was going to lose everything. She was going to lose Leo. She was going to lose her job, and Sophie was going to remain in that hell, maybe even worse now that Mrs. Peterson was on alert. The phone rang. It was an unknown number. Megan answered, afraid. "Megan, it's Edward Miller." Megan's heart leaped. "Mr. Miller, I came back from my trip early. I need to talk to you. Tomorrow, at 7 in the morning before Alberta wakes up. Can you come in early?" "Yes, I can." "Good. And Megan, I read your letter. I read everything. We're going to fix this." Edward's voice was heavy with emotion, but also with determination. Megan hung up the phone and stood there trying to process. Edward knew. He finally knew. There was hope. But would it be in time? Would it be enough? The next morning, Megan arrived at the mansion at 6:30. Edward was waiting for her at the door, his face tense and tired. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. They went inside together, silently. In the office, Edward closed the door and turned to Megan. His eyes were red. "I failed my daughter. For years I failed her. I let the grief of losing my wife consume me to the point where I couldn't see what was happening under my own roof. Alberta convinced me that Sophie was fragile, that I would make her worse. How if I got too close, that she needed specialized care that only Alberta knew how to provide? And I believed her, because it was easier to believe than to confront my own cowardice." Megan listened in silence, watching a broken man finally face his truth. "But now I know. I saw the pictures. I read your notes. I saw the documents about the inheritance. I understand Alberta's plan, and I'm going to do what I should have done years ago. I'm going to protect my daughter." Edward took a deep breath. "But I need your help. I need you to stay here to continue being the eyes I failed to be, because if Alberta suspects that I know, if she realizes she's lost control, I don't know what she's capable of." Megan agreed, but she had to tell him the truth. "Mr. Miller, there's something you need to know." Mrs. Peterson found out I'm helping Sophie. She reported me to Child Protective Services. They're going to investigate if I'm fit to have custody of my son. She's trying to get me out of the way." Edward closed his eyes, his jaw tight. "That's not going to happen. I'll have my lawyer take care of it today. Alberta is not going to destroy another family." His voice was firm, with an authority Megan hadn't heard before. In the following days, the tension in the mansion was palpable. Mrs. Peterson sensed that something had changed, but she didn't know exactly what. Edward was back from his trip, but now he was acting differently, more present, more attentive. He asked questions about Sophie. He wanted details about her treatments. The housekeeper responded with her rehearsed lies, but there was a nervousness in her voice. Edward took notes, discreetly recorded conversations, building a solid case. Megan continued to work, but now she had an ally. Edward would seek her out whenever Mrs. Peterson left, and they would discuss strategies, share observations. They were building a net of protection around Sophie, but Sophie was getting worse. The inappropriate medications Mrs. Peterson was giving her had been intensified. The girl could barely stand. She ate almost nothing. She spent her days lying down, too weak to move. On a Thursday afternoon, Megan went up to the room when Mrs. Peterson left for the market. She found Sophie nearly unconscious, feverish, delirious. The girl was muttering nonsensical words, calling for a mother she had never known. Megan grabbed her phone and called Edward, who was working from his home office. "You need to come, now. Sophie is very sick." Edward ran upstairs. When he saw his daughter in that state, what little control he had left shattered. He picked Sophie up in his arms. "We're going to the hospital now." "But Mr. Miller, Mrs. Peterson will know. She'll realize." "I don't care anymore. My daughter is dying. I'm not waiting another second." Edward carried Sophie to the car. Megan went with them. They left Mrs. Peterson a message simply stating they had taken Sophie to the hospital due to a medical emergency. At the hospital, doctors examined Sophie immediately. They ran blood tests, x-rays, and ultrasound. When the results came back, the doctor called Edward over with a grave expression. "Mr. Miller, your daughter is severely malnourished. There are signs of chronic poisoning. The levels of certain substances in her blood are dangerously high. We need to admit her immediately, and with all due respect, I'm going to have to call the authorities. This has all the hallmarks of severe, possibly intentional neglect." Edward didn't try to stop him. It was exactly what they needed. Official authorities, medical proof, a formal case that Mrs. Peterson couldn't dispute with her lies. Megan stayed by Sophie's side as the doctors worked. The girl, hooked up to IVs and monitors, opened her eyes for a moment. "Megan, are you still here?" "I am, and I'm not leaving, I promise." "Don't let her take me back, please." "No one is taking you back, Sophie, ever again. Your dad is here. I'm here. You're safe now." A social worker arrived at the hospital, along with representatives from Child Protective Services. They Edward interviewed Megan and examined the evidence they had collected. The whole story began to unravel. Mrs. Peterson was called to the hospital. When she arrived and saw the situation, she tried to maintain her composure, but she was clearly panicking. She tried to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that she was just following medical advice, that she had documents proving the treatments. But when they requested those documents, when they asked for the names of the doctors who had prescribed the treatments, Mrs. Peterson's stories began to contradict each other. There were no doctors. There were no legitimate prescriptions. There were only years of manipulation, control, and abuse. Megan watched it all from a distance, holding the hand of a sedated, sleeping Sophie. She felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief because the truth was finally coming out. Terror because she didn't know what would happen now. To Sophie, to Edward, to herself. Edward approached her. "Megan, thank you. Without you, I never would have known. Sophie would be—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "She's going to be okay now. She has to be." "She will be. I'll make sure of it. And about the report. Against you. My lawyer is already on it. We have witnesses, documents, proof that you're an exemplary mother who was putting her own safety at risk to save a child. No judge is going to take Leo from you." Megan felt the tears fall. She had been so strong for so long, carrying so much weight alone. Now, finally, She had someone on her side. Someone who saw, who understood, who helped. That night in the hospital was long. Sophie slept, connected to monitors that beeped softly. Edward sat in a chair by her bed, watching his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Megan stayed too, refusing to leave until she knew Sophie was stable. In the early morning, Sophie woke up. She looked around, confused, scared. "Where am I?" "In the hospital, sweetie. You're sick, but the doctors are taking care of you," Megan explained gently. Sophie saw her father sitting there and her eyes widened. "Daddy." Edward stood up and went to the bed, taking his daughter's small hand. "I'm here, Sophie, and I'm not leaving. I'm never going to leave you alone again. You promise?" Sophie's voice was so fragile, so full of hope and fear. "I promise, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Sophie started to cry, and Edward hugged her carefully, mindful of the tubes and wires. Megan watched the scene, her heart aching with emotion. It had been worth it. All the risk, all the fear, all the uncertainty. It had been worth it because Sophie finally had what she always deserved: a family, love, security. But Megan knew the road ahead would be long. Sophie would have to recover physically, and that would take time. She would have to recover emotionally, and that would take even longer. And Edward would have to learn to be a father, to overcome his own guilt and pain, to build a real relationship with his daughter. But for the first time since it all began, Megan had real hope. Because they weren't fighting alone anymore. They were together, and together they would find a path to healing. Mrs. Peterson hurried up the stairs, responding to Edward's call. Megan remained in the kitchen, paralyzed, trying to hear what was happening in the office. Voices were raised. First Edward's altered, demanding explanations, then Mrs. Peterson's, first defensive, then indignant, vehemently denying everything. The argument intensified. Megan heard Edward's voice break with emotion, asking how this could have happened under his own roof, how he hadn't noticed. Mrs. Peterson tried to justify herself, claiming that everything she did was for Sophie's own good, that the girl was truly fragile, that the treatments were necessary, but Edward wasn't buying it. Not anymore. "Megan, could you come up here, please?" Edward's voice came through the kitchen intercom. Her legs trembling, Megan climbed the stairs. When she entered the office, she found Edward Miller sitting behind the desk, the open envelope. In front of him, the photos spread out, his face pale and distraught. Mrs. Peterson stood beside him, arms crossed, her face a mask of contained fury. Edward looked at Megan with red-rimmed eyes. "Did you write this? Did you take these pictures?" Megan nodded, her voice coming out steadier than she expected. "Yes, sir. Everything in there is true. Your daughter is being kept in inhuman conditions. She is being manipulated, and her health is being deliberately destroyed." Mrs. Peterson took a step forward, her voice sharp. "This is absurd. This woman is lying, Edward. She's been here less than a month and thinks she knows more than I do, who has cared for Sophie since she was born. The girl has serious health problems. She always has. I only do what is necessary to keep her alive." "Then why is she locked up? Why doesn't she go to school? Why doesn't she have friends? Why doesn't she leave her room?" Megan confronted the housekeeper, her anger finally overcoming her fear. "Because she can't. Because her immune system is too fragile," Mrs. Peterson shouted, losing her composure. Edward stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I want to see my daughter. Now." Mrs. Peterson paled. "Edward, that's not a good idea. She's not prepared. She'll be frightened." "I said now." Edward's voice was that of someone who had finally woken from a long nightmare and was beginning to see reality. The three of them went up to the second floor. Mrs. Peterson tried to lead the way, but Edward stopped her, demanding the key to the room. The housekeeper hesitated, but had no choice. She handed over the key with trembling hands. Edward opened the bedroom door slowly. The sight that greeted him made him stagger. Sophie was sitting on the bed, hugging her knees, too small, too thin, too scared. When she saw the man standing in the doorway, she shrank back even further. "Sophie! My God!" Edward entered the room slowly. as if approaching a wounded animal. He knelt beside the bed, tears streaming freely down his face. "My daughter, my little girl, what have they done to you?" Sophie looked at the man with wide eyes. "Are you my daddy?" she asked in a voice so quiet it was barely audible. "I am. I am your father. And I am so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. That I didn't see, that I didn't protect you." Sophie didn't move, but her eyes sought out Megan behind Edward. Megan nodded, encouragingly. The girl then, hesitantly, reached out a small hand and touched Edward's face. "You're not going to send me away? You're not going to leave me here? I promise I'll take all my medicine. I'll be good." The words broke Edward completely. He hugged his daughter carefully, as if she were made of glass, sobbing uncontrollably. "You're not going to take any more medicine that makes you sick. You're not going to be locked in here anymore. You're going to leave this room. You're going to see the sun. You're going to play. You're going to live. I promise." Mrs. Peterson watched the scene from the doorway with an expression that mixed anger and desperation. "Edward, you don't understand. She needs the treatments. Without them, she'll get worse." "No." Edward turned to her, still holding Sophie. "Enough lies. I'm taking my daughter to the hospital now. Real doctors will examine her. And you, Alberta, will answer for everything you've done." The housekeeper tried to argue, but Edward had already picked up the phone and called his lawyer, quickly explaining the situation. Megan heard him ask for the proper authorities and a trusted doctor to be called. Mrs. Peterson's mask finally fell. She tried to leave the room, but Edward blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere until the authorities arrive." Megan stood by Sophie, holding her small, cold hand. The girl was in shock, processing everything that was happening. "It's okay now, Sophie. It's okay," Megan whispered. Within 20 minutes, the house was full of people. A private doctor arrived first, rushed over by Edward's lawyer. He examined Sophie right there in the room, and what he found visibly disturbed him. Severe malnutrition, signs of prolonged neglect, symptoms of chronic poisoning from improper use of supplements. He recommended immediate hospitalization for stabilization and proper treatment. Soon after, social workers and representatives from Child Protective Services arrived. Mrs. Peterson was immediately removed from her duties and forbidden from having any contact with Sophie. The housekeeper tried to defend herself, claiming she had always acted in the child's best interest, but the evidence was irrefutable. The documents Megan had copied, the photos, the videos, everything was handed over to the authorities. Edward picked Sophie up, wrapped her in a clean blanket Megan brought and carried her to the car. Before leaving, he turned to Megan. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing my daughter when I was too cowardly to look. Thank you for not giving up on her." Megan just nodded, tears blurring her vision. "Take good care of her. She deserves all the good the world has to offer." Sophie was taken to the hospital, where she was admitted for 2 weeks. The doctors confirmed what Megan had already suspected. The girl had no serious illness. Everything she suffered was a direct result of the abuse she had been subjected to. With proper treatment, a balanced diet, and psychological counseling, she would make a full recovery. It would take time, especially to heal the emotional wounds, but there was real hope for a normal life. Mrs. Peterson was permanently dismissed. The investigation revealed that she had manipulated Edward for years, taking advantage of his guilt and grief over his wife's death to gain total control over Sophie and her inheritance. She managed the funds as she pleased, diverting money to her own accounts, living comfortably while Sophie withered away. The plan was to keep the girl sick and dependent until she could no longer survive, at which point Mrs. Peterson would get everything. It was a cruel plan, executed slowly over years. Edward, confronted with the reality of his own neglect, had to make difficult choices. He publicly acknowledged that he had failed as a father, that he had let the pain of losing his wife consume him to the point of emotionally abandoning his daughter. He stepped down from several professional commitments, reorganizing his entire life to be truly present for Sophie. As for Megan, she continued to work at the mansion during Sophie's recovery, but now as a sort of caregiver and a bridge between the girl and her father. Edward insisted she stay, recognizing that Sophie trusted her in a way she trusted no one else. Her salary was substantially increased, and Megan was finally able to give Leo the stability she had always wanted for him. In the first few days after the hospitalization, Megan visited Sophie every day after work. She brought Leo with her, and it was beautiful to see the two children meet and become friends. Leo, with his infectious energy and innocence, helped Sophie remember that the world could be a good place. He made her laugh, something Megan wasn't sure the girl knew how to do. When Sophie was discharged from the hospital, Edward brought her home, but now everything was different. The room was completely renovated. Large windows were installed to let the sunlight in. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow. New, colorful furniture was brought in. Toys filled the shelves. Children's books appeared in every corner. The cold, silent mansion began to come to life. Edward hired a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma to work with Sophie 3 times a week. The girl was scared at first, but slowly she began to open up, to talk about the years of isolation, the constant fear, the crushing loneliness. The psychologist also worked with Edward, helping him connect with his daughter, understand her needs, and build a real relationship. Megan was present for many of these moments. She became a mother figure to Sophie in a way that surprised everyone, including herself. When Sophie had nightmares, it was Megan she called for. When she didn't want to eat, it was Megan who could patiently and lovingly convince her. When she was afraid to leave the house, it was Megan's hand she held. Months passed. Sophie began to gain weight. Her cheeks filled out, her eyes grew brighter. She started to smile more, to talk more, to play. Edward enrolled her in a small private school with small classes and teachers prepared to handle children who needed special attention. The first few days were difficult. Sophie struggled to interact with other children. She didn't know how to play, how to share, how to make friends. But slowly, with patience and support, she began to adapt. A year after the rescue, Sophie was unrecognizable. Physically, she looked like a normal 8-year-old. She had energy, she ran, she played, she laughed out loud. Emotionally, she still carried scars, still had difficult days, still sometimes woke up in the middle of the night afraid she was back in that locked room. But she was healing. She was learning to live. Edward had changed too. He had sold part of his business to spend more time at home. He had dinner with Sophie every night. He took her to the park on weekends. He read her stories before bed. He was learning to be a father, and though he made mistakes, he was present. He was trying. And that made all the difference. Megan, in turn, also saw her life transform. With a decent, stable salary, she was able to move into a better, more spacious apartment in a safer neighborhood. Leo now had his own room, decorated with the superheroes he loved. She was able to enroll him in a good public school, where he was doing well and making friends. The bills were paid on time. There was food in the fridge. There was peace. But more than financial stability, Megan had something far more valuable. She had the certainty that she had made a difference, that she had saved a life, that she had given Sophie a chance no one else was willing to give. And that, she discovered, was worth more than any money in the world. One Saturday afternoon, almost 2 years after the rescue, Megan, Leo, Edward, and Sophie went to the park together. The day was beautiful, sunny with a few white clouds in the sky. Sophie chased Leo, both of them laughing as they played tag. Edward sat next to Megan on a bench, watching the children. "I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you did," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have chosen not to get involved. They would have chosen their own comfort and safety. You chose to risk everything for a child you barely knew. That's rare. That's special. Megan watched Sophie run, her blonde hair shining in the sun, her laughter echoing through the park. "I have a son. I know what it's like to love a child, to do anything to protect them. When I looked at Sophie, I saw Leo. I saw what he would be if he were in that situation, and I couldn't turn my back." Edward nodded, understanding. "Are you two having dinner with us tonight? Sophie loves it when Leo comes over." Megan smiled. "We'd love to. Leo loves it too. I think he's finally found the sister he always wanted." "And Sophie has found the family she always needed," Edward completed, watching the two children play together. That night, the four of them had dinner together in the mansion that was no longer cold or silent. There was laughter, conversation, stories being told. Sophie showed Leo the drawings she had made at school. Leo showed Sophie the new game he had gotten. Edward told bad jokes that made everyone laugh. Megan made the kids' favorite dessert. After dinner, while Leo and Sophie went to play in the living room, Edward and Megan stayed in the kitchen doing the dishes together. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Edward said hesitantly. Megan looked at him, curious. "Go ahead. Have you ever thought about going back to school, maybe getting a college degree?" Megan laughed a little self-consciously. "Edward, I barely finished high school, and I don't have money for college. What if I helped? You could study education, psychology, social work. You have a natural gift for helping children. It would be a waste not to develop it, and I can pay for it. I want to, not as a favor, but as recognition for what you did and what you continue to do." Megan was silent for a moment, processing the offer. It was tempting. She had always dreamed of going to college, of having a career that was more than just survival, but it seemed too big, too impossible. "I don't know, it's a lot. Think about it. The offer doesn't have an expiration date. Whenever you feel ready, if you feel ready, we can talk about it." Megan agreed, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. But the seed had been planted, and in the following days Megan found herself thinking about it, imagining possibilities, dreaming of futures that had once seemed impossible. Sophie, meanwhile, continued to blossom. For her 9th birthday, Edward threw a party with her classmates, neighbors, and distant relatives who were starting to become part of their lives again. The house was filled with children laughing, playing, eating cake. Sophie, at the center of it all, looked incredibly happy. Megan watched from a distance, her heart full. Leo was by Sophie's side, helping her open presents. Edward circulated among the guests, smiling a genuine smile for the first time in years. The psychologist had said that Sophie still had a long road ahead, that the trauma wouldn't disappear completely, but that she was on the right path. She was learning to trust, to love, to live. And as she watched that scene, Megan realized something important. She had gone to work, in that mansion, just to survive, to pay the bills, to not lose her son. But she had found so much more than a job. She had found a purpose. She had found an extended family. She had found herself. Sophie blew out the candles on her cake, surrounded by friends and family. She made a silent wish. Later, after everyone had gone home and the children were asleep, Sophie told Megan what her wish had been. "I wished that I would never have to go back to that room, that I would never be alone again, that I would always have you, Leo, and Daddy close by." Megan hugged the girl tightly, tears streaming freely. "And I promise that wish will come true, Sophie. You will never be alone again. Never." And she kept that promise. Every day, in every way possible, Megan made sure Sophie knew she was loved, that she was seen, that she mattered. And slowly, day by day, Sophie transformed from a broken child into a strong, brave girl, full of dreams and possibilities. Years later, when Sophie was 15 and a confident teenager who loved to read, draw, and help younger kids at school, she wrote an essay for an assignment about people who inspired her life. She wrote about Megan, about the woman who had risked everything to save her, about the woman who had seen her humanity when everyone else had chosen not to look, about the woman who had proven that sometimes heroes don't wear capes, but cleaning aprons and courageous hearts. Megan read the essay with tears in her eyes. She realized that on that day, years ago, when she decided to climb those stairs and speak to a child she didn't know, she had changed not only Sophie's life, but her own as well. She had discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it, and that sometimes all a child needs is someone who cares enough not to give up on them. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Megan and Sophie has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by Megan's courage, if you felt Sophie's pain and then her joy, if you believe that every child deserves to be seen, loved, and protected, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment of the story resonated with you the most. Every day, we bring you intense and true stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us of the transformative power of love and courage. Your presence here makes all the difference. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on life. See you soon.